Story 1. The first story in this collection has been written and posted by myself. I have been a long-time reader of this subreddit, and this is the first time I am posting about my experience. I have a slight hope to see if there is anyone out there who has had similar experiences in the same location. Unlikely, I know, but since this happened, I have always been curious about the building where the events occurred. When I was younger, I was heavily involved in young people's theatre. I grew up in the city of Bath, where most of my childhood was spent at the Theatre Royal Bath's Youth Theatre. Most of the plays we did were performed in the theatre's studio space. Occasionally, we were allowed to do a show on the main house stage. As the studio theatre became more popular for small live events, we had to perform shows in other venues in the city. One venue was the Rondo Theatre, located a little ways out of the main city in an area called Lark Hall. I was invited to act in a student production of a Greek play, which, as is often the case with small-scale theatre productions, was incredibly behind with technical rehearsals. My best friend at the time, a guy who went by the name of Sonic, was the lighting designer and operator for the show. He had decided that to get the lighting design complete in time for the final dress rehearsal, he needed to spend the night in the theatre after everyone else had left. He brought a sleeping bag with him so he could take the occasional nap in the lighting box. When I showed up the next morning, I inquired how things had gone. He told me he had got a lot done, but when he tried to sleep, he couldn't. When he came to a point where his focus was dwindling and his tiredness was setting in, he lay down for a nap. Throughout the entire night, he was kept awake by the sound of footsteps walking up and down the stairs in the building. He had made sure the building was completely locked up after everyone had left, so there was no way anyone would be in there. Something worth mentioning is that all the flooring was incredibly creaky. During this show, myself and another actor finished our last scenes and would go to the dressing room to wait for our curtain call. The exit from the right side of the stage led to a small corridor, with a fire exit to the left and a staircase to the right. The staircase kind of spiraled up, and a single dressing room ran the entire floor above the stage. During this show, we discovered that walking across the dressing room floor could be heard on the stage and the auditorium, so we agreed that during the show, we were not to go into the dressing room when off stage. I returned to the theatre some years later to do another show. The director was new to the space, so I informed her of the noise issue from the dressing room. She made the decision that we should keep everyone on stage, in some pretentious, edgy style to keep us from going into the dressing room and causing a noise distraction. Before we started rehearsing for the play, I had purchased a brand new Discman. Yes, this was a while ago now. And, as with all new toys, I was concerned about it getting stolen if it was left in the dressing room. As the only access to the dressing room was via the stage and the side exit door, all I had to do was ensure the door remained locked from the inside at all times, which I checked on frequently. During our first dress rehearsal, I was alarmed to hear the sound of footsteps walking across the dressing room above the stage. I was on stage, but in a position where I could walk off and not impact the rehearsal. The director might get annoyed, but I was willing to risk that for the sake of the £100 Discman I could potentially lose. Everyone who was involved in the show was accounted for, which meant that whomever was above us had to have been an unknown, potentially one of the thieves we had been warned about by the theatre manager. As I was in a situation where I could not walk away from the rehearsal altogether, I turned to one of the assistant stage managers and told her to check that the side door was still locked, and then to check the dressing room for an intruder. Surprisingly, she went ahead and did so. When she got back down, she informed me no one was there. Then we heard it again. Clear sounds of someone walking back and forth in the dressing room. I told her to check it again and this time check the bathrooms and showers to make sure no one was hiding. Apprehensively, she went back up the stairs. When she returned a second time, she told me that she saw nothing. Then the footsteps started again. I insisted she go and check one more time, but by this point, she was too freaked out and refused to go back up. I had to go back on stage for a scene. and after a short while, the sounds ceased. After the rehearsal, I went upstairs expecting to find the dressing room ransacked. There was nothing. No sign of theft. No sign of anyone having been up there. Eventually, I moved to Essex to study at a university. 7 or 8 years later, I returned to Bath and met up with a guy who went on to become my best friend. He had studied theatre in Bath, and we were planning on getting some projects going together. We started talking about the paranormal, and he mentioned the Rondo Theatre. Years after I'd had my experiences, he'd had similar ones when doing shows there. At one point, he had inquired with the manager of the theatre, who didn't give him any specifics, but did acknowledge that strange things do happen there. If you happen to be someone that has experienced anything at the Rondo Theatre and happens to have stumbled upon this, I would love to know your stories. Story 2 by Reddit user GraveyardBaby666. This happened to me when I was in college. Probably one of the creepiest and weirdest things to ever happen to me. I believe in ghosts. I have had countless experiences in my life that have made it almost impossible for me not to. This still gives me chills whenever I think about it. I was a freshman in college and was heavily involved in the arts, theatre and music specifically. The Fine Arts building of my college had quite a bit of history. It was built in 1916 and had previously been one of the largest Masonic temples in the city. This is fairly evident by the Masonic symbols adorning the building and covering the stained glass windows. I had heard rumours of secret passageways under the building that ran all the way into downtown, but I will say I didn't believe them. A few of my professors had told stories of seeing shadow people or feeling like they were being watched when they knew they were alone. But I thought they were just messing with us freshmen. I spent most of my time in the costume shop. I should note, the costume shop was on the sub-ground floor, technically the basement. It was down 2 flights of stairs from the main entrance that led to a landing with a costume shop and another door that I assumed was a utility closet because it was always locked. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was just something off about it to me. On this particular evening, I had finished rehearsals for a play around 6 p.m. and figured I would do a bit of cleaning in the costume shop while I waited for my roommate to meet me so we could go grab some dinner. I was inside the costume shop when I heard a knock at the door. I walked over and looked out of the small window to the right side of the door expecting to see my roommate, but no one was there. I opened the door and stepped out looking around. I looked down the hallway to the left of the door to see if my roommate was hiding, trying to freak me out. Nothing. I shrugged it off as me being tired and went back into the shop and shut the door behind me. I went about my business for a bit until I heard another knock at the door, a few minutes later. I was more hesitant this time. I walked to the door and again looked out the small window. Still, there was no one outside. I tried to open the door, and while the handle turned, the door wouldn't budge. I pulled harder, thinking that maybe the door was stuck. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like someone was holding it shut. I looked out the window again, and still didn't see anyone. I was now frantically pulling on the handle, feeling the fear rising in my chest. I let go of the handle only to have it start shaking wildly. Suddenly, it stopped. Everything was quiet with the exception of my own shaky breath. Then, from outside the door, I heard the sound of a door creaking open. I gathered my strength and tried the door. It opened, and I cautiously walked onto the landing. The always locked door was ajar. I called out. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I tried not to sound freaked out, but I was absolutely terrified. I pulled open the door and was greeted by a pitch-black staircase leading down. It smelled like a tomb that had just been unsealed after 100 years. Musty and ancient. I felt the wall for a light switch, but couldn't find one. I reached into my pocket for my cell phone and turned the screen on. It was bright enough that I could sort of see my own way down the stairs. The walls were brick, and the stairs were made of stone. The closer I got to the bottom, the colder it became. I was on the second to last step, straining to see what was in front of me. It was a door, a large stone door. I was about to move to the last step when I heard it. A voice. It was deep and sounded like it was right in front of me. It only said one word. Welcome. I couldn't even scream. Instead, I ran up the stairs, tripping at one point and skinning my knee and shin. Once I reached the top, I slammed the door shut and ran out of the building. My roommate showed up 5 minutes later to find me standing on the sidewalk, shaking. After I told her what happened, she went inside and got my things and locked the costume shop door. When she came out, she looked at me with a worried expression. That door was wide open when I went to get your stuff. Are you sure you closed it? I just nodded my head. We walked home and didn't really talk more about it. I didn't go back into the building until the end of the next week. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. When I finally did, I descended the stairs and felt a chill shoot through my body. I looked at the wall where the door had been, and there was nothing there. Just a wall. I thought I was losing my mind. I walked to the wall and studied it. My drama teacher happened to be walking by, and I stopped him. Wasn't there a door here? He chuckled. Yeah, they walled it up last week. Did it in a hurry too. Not entirely sure why though. I always thought it was a closet or something. I can't say what I encountered that night. Was it the spirit of a Freemason who never left their temple? Was it something more sinister? I honestly don't know. I spent a lot of time in that building over the course of my 2 years at the college, and while I had other odd experiences, they were nothing compared to what I experienced that one awful night. Before I continue to the next story, I just want to say thank you for choosing to watch this video, and I hope you're enjoying my narration. If you are, please show your appreciation by liking this video, subscribing to my channel, and leaving a comment. Thanks. Story 3 by Reddit user Scheiblerfunk. The following events really did take place, and the theatre really does exist. However, due to some changes, the stage and the seating area, as well as the rest of the building, have now been added to the neighbouring hospital area. Back in 2017, I partook in a theatre workshop which took place over the course of a weekend. We would use the stage for all the thespian-related activities by day, and sleep on it using mattresses and sleeping bags by night. The theatre building in question wasn't all that old and had previously served as part of a hospital, but could nonetheless offer 2 ghostish stories to its lore. One was related to a supposedly unremovable, strange, somewhat heart-shaped spot on the stage. According to legend, the spot came to be because of a Shakespeare-level misunderstanding based on murder during the Napoleonic Wars. The story goes that a mill once stood upon its ground. Not all of Napoleon's troops were gentlemen, and one of them broke into the mill and raped the miller's wife. Upon his return, the miller was informed of this and promptly challenged whom he thought to be the soldier in question to a duel. The miller won, and the soldier died. However, as it turned out, that miller had accidentally challenged the wrong man, and the now dead soldier only accepted the challenge out of a sense of honor. The same honor that the rapist was lacking, which is why he had already fled. Therefore, the miller's deed was a murder committed out of love, which is why, or so I am told, the stain on the stage resembles the shape of a heart. The stain has supposedly been there ever since the building's construction in the 1920s. It's mostly a story, but I do have to admit that the spot is a tad eerie. Add to that the experiences that my brother and one of the employees of the theatre had while sleeping alone on the stage. Ominous knocking sounds, waking up her feet from where they'd fallen asleep, and even a slight glow emanating from a spot whenever a play involving love-based murder is played. Although the latter might be attributable to lighting errors, it has been stated that the stain has never been successfully removed, though I'm not sure if that's true. The other potentially supernatural occurrence, and one that I can lend a bit more credibility to, is related to a man who was in charge of the theatre for many years, but sadly passed away in 2006. The man's name was Stefan Müller. By now you probably realise that this story takes place in Europe, or rather Germany to be precise. Anyhow, this man was very passionate about his job, and his motto was, "Not everything is theatre, but without theatre, everything is nothing." I met him once or twice in my childhood, since my brother and sister both performed at the theatre when they were teenagers. Just for clarification, it was a children and youth theatre, with the slogan, "Children perform for children." As I previously said, my brother and I partook in a theatre workshop during a weekend in 2017. I had heard the stain story before, but my brother had just recently told me about how it sometimes feels as if the spirit of Herr Stefan Müller is still wandering the theatre seats at night, as he had done many times during his lifetime. He had, after all, directed many plays and would mostly remain in the viewer section, observing the performance and giving advice sometimes of the humorous kind, and how to improve what he saw. He was a fair director who would know how to direct children and teenagers the right way, without either being condescending or spoiling them. It would seem to me that a man so good at his craft would have a good reason to haunt the halls he once occupied so frequently. The first night was not really uneventful, but rather went unnoticed due to my body having been sleep-deprived the previous few days. I fell asleep the moment my arse hit the mattress. Therefore, I shall skip the assortment of unimportant yet, as always, strange dreams and talk about the night from Saturday to Sunday. I tried to get to sleep. However, the exciting experiences of the day kept me from calmly drifting off into Morpheus's arms. Then I tried to concentrate on my breath, as it would surely supply me with peace and calm. However, to my dismay, this exercise merely resulted in me noticing a noise that had previously escaped my attention due to all the restless shifting. An almost rhythmic tapping sound, slow, resembling the steps of a man caught up in his thoughts. I wasn't certain whether or not my ears were playing tricks on me, but it sounded as if these tapping sounds came straight from the seating area. The story of Herr Müller's haunting fresh in my mind, my heart started to accelerate. I desperately tried to ignore the tapping and just drift off into a slumber. It was useless. The tapping was relentless. Not really loud, but not quiet enough to be disregarded as white noise. It was as if it had always been there, like a small spider's web glistening with raindrops, ready to catch a fly if only it would take notice. Now, it had gotten me in its semi-hypnotic strings of sound. I furthermore noticed that the tapping seemed to change position at a suspicious walk-like pace, from the right end of the auditorium to the left end of it. Then, I could have sworn it was approaching my position. It came closer. I tried to keep my breath calm, only to realize I had held my breath for at least 30 seconds. The step-like noises came closer until they were mere feet away, and then they would stop approaching and instead move beneath the edge of the stage. I opened my eyes and was greeted by the darkness of my surroundings. The auditorium had blinds which had been lowered to help everyone sleep better. I do have to admit to my shame that until the age of 15 I slept with a nightlight, and even after I still never shut the blinds, because I'm not very fond of awakening to total darkness, especially when I'm still in a dazed state of half-dreaming, given the bizarre uninvited visions it brings. Total blackness is the mind's best canvas after all. It was precisely this kind of darkness that greeted me and made it near impossible to see anything. It took a while, but after a few seconds I started to make out crude shapes of seats. This, however, was only true of the first few rows. The rest of the auditorium was bathed in impierceable blackness. The noise continued, much to my dismay, so I decided to get up and go to the backstage to use the lavatory. I calmed down as I entered the backstage area, which was faintly lit by an exit sign. I entered the toilet and was blinded right after using the light switch. During my business, I calmed down even more and realized with my mind that what I heard must have obviously been nothing more than something small knocking against the outer wall by the wind. So I decided that upon my return to the stage, I would walk towards the noise and find its origin. I walked back onto the stage and up to the small staircase, which would normally allow the actors to descend the stage without jumping off the edge. But before I even considered walking down, I stopped. The noise still kept wandering, and I couldn't see anything beyond the first row. I kept on staring into the void, my breath filled with nervousness, my body ever so slightly shaking. I'm not certain just how long I stood there, feeling too scared by the darkness and the noise to further advance. After a while, I decided to go back to my sleeping bag and try to embrace Morpheus's arms. The next morning, when I awoke, I didn't hear the tapping sound anymore. Story 4 by Reddit user Polish Ninja 909. When I was 13, my mum and I moved out of a suburban city outside of Dallas to her hometown near Waco, Texas. Very soon after we got there, she and I both got involved in local community theatre. She acted and directed, and I did crew work until I eventually took up acting myself. The main theatre was actually a corrugated steel addition to a much older brick building. The older building was once a college but now served as a general arts centre. The building has a reputation of being haunted. Performers and crew members all had experienced something. Lights getting shut off, whispers behind them, shadow people, etc. My first experience was when I was 13. My mum was practicing on stage as we did most weeknights, and I was in the green room. The green room served as a sort of lounge for people who weren't on stage or needed immediately backstage. I was there doing homework. Suddenly, I could hear a child laughing. This wouldn't be too surprising. The couch I was seated on was directly against the exterior-facing wall. This was a tin building after all, so it wouldn't be odd to hear children laughing as they played in the empty parking lot of the theatre. The laughing persisted, however, and got louder. I decided I would investigate, so I got up and opened the exit door. There were no children outside or anywhere in sight. I was the only child on set that day as well. I shook off the odd feeling and turned to go back to my homework. As I turned, I saw, in the doorway to the backstage corridor, the silhouette of a girl. She was maybe 5 or 6, estimated by her height, and wearing what looked like a prairie dress. She then turned and ran to the backstage corridor, laughing the whole way. I waited a moment to make sure I was still alone, and grabbed my homework and ran backstage and just hung out there the rest of the night. I must reiterate that I was the only child on the set that day. The play took place in modern times and did not call for any cast to be wearing prairie dresses. My mum and I, and still are, pretty open when it comes to stuff like that, so I told her, in the company of another friend and actor. My mum's friend perked up immediately and said that she had seen the girl multiple times, and then it was rumoured to be the daughter of one of the college presidents, who fell off the roof of the building and died. She said that the girl was a prankster, that she would turn off the lights in a room you were in or move things to another part of the room when you weren't looking. However, she only did these things when you were alone. She said that she was once on top of some scaffolding painting a set facade when the lights suddenly turned off and she can hear the girl giggle immediately after the room fell silent. She had to, in darkness, navigate the scaffolding, carefully climb down the ladder, and go all the way across the theatre to turn the lights back on. Story 5 by Reddit user narrate. When I was a kid, my parents spent a good deal of time at our community theatre. I learned a lot of great life skills as well as having fun. There were things that happened, though, that I had not spoken to anyone about until I was in college. Here are some of the instances and the revelation my mum gave me when I finally told her. The community theatre moved from a black box style to a space that was used, but I would describe as an evangelical modern Christian church. More stadium seating, high lights, no catwalk. Something you might see on televised mass. I was raised Roman Catholic, so I had little idea about these churches. Our family started helping out right before the big move, so most of my experiences were in the new space. Now, I need to describe the layout more of the new space as it does matter to the story. There was the entrance with the box office and concession areas, the theatre itself behind. Then, behind the theatre, were the shop and a series of rooms that would become dressing rooms, the green room, and costume shop. At the very end was a large meeting space. The distance between the theatre and the meeting space was probably 50 to 75 feet. The long hallway was the only corridor. I hated that corridor. I especially hated it when I had to walk from the theatre to the meeting room and only the emergency lights were on. I would sprint as fast as I could between the two spaces. I would only go into the various rooms along the corridor if the lights were on in the room and the hallway. I never understood why I hated it so much. I wasn't afraid of the dark or claustrophobic. Even now, thinking about the corridor makes my anxiety flare up. I have a memory of dark figures in the corridor, but I don't remember what I was doing. Just seeing a dark silhouette waiting for me at one of the ends. I say memory because I don't actually know if I saw it or I dreamt it, and I believe it was real now. Some things I do remember very clearly, like the time I was setting the lighting and soundboards to a performance. I clearly remember setting one of the boards, turning to the next to set it, and then turning back to the first board and finding all the sliders pushed back down to the bottom. This happened a few times. I remember being on the stage to make sure one of the lights above was pointed in the right direction, and looking into the audience and seeing a man I had never met just sitting in the audience watching me. I turned to call for my older brother, to ask him, and when I looked back, he was gone. I still remember the smile on his face. Not creepy per se, but more of a proud Papa Bear, which made no sense. The last big thing I remember was every time just before a big freeze or snowstorm would hit our area, there was loud banging on the pipes throughout the building. Not at all once, just all over, at various times. I ended up going to college to study theatre education to become a theatre teacher. During a discussion in class about theatre superstitions, someone said, "Only real theatres have ghosts." I would later completely agree with this. I remember talking to my mum about the discussion, and she said it made sense the community theatre was haunted, which clicked something in my brain, and she told me all about Bob. Bob was a plumber that used to work with the community theatre. He loved it. Bob sadly passed away suddenly from a heart attack. Bob's ghost stuck around the community theatre, even moving with the company to the new location. I have never seen a photo of Bob during his life, but I bet he was the guy I saw in the theatre watching me adjust lights. He was also the reason the pipes would bang before a big freeze, to let everyone know to take proper precautions. I don't know if he was the one messing with the boards or the weird figures I saw in the corridor, or the reason I hated it so much. I doubt he was in the corridor since my mum said he was a nice ghost, but I may never really know. I told her some of the stories, edited others. She thinks I was just creeped out by the corridor. And others I have never told her. Story 6 by Reddit user Bird and Bear. So cliché, I know, but this happened. Throughout the 2000s, I was part of a tiny independent theatre company with zero funding. Every show we did came out of our own pockets, so we needed a venue that would let us work for cheap. We found one in a local historic theatre. This place was mostly a music venue, but they had a tiny theatre upstairs, and the owners were awesome. We were allowed to rehearse for free and just pay a small fee each performance night. We did so many Shakespeares with loud music, usually metal, coming up through the floor. Hamlet's soliloquy accompanied by corn is quite a sight to see. This place also had a documented history of hauntings. Several of us had small experiences there. Knocking, things falling over, disappearing from where we put them, etc. Nothing that could be explained by the chaos of rehearsal except the feeling of always being watched. One summer night, we were rehearsing in the upstairs bar area. The owners were great to us, but couldn't afford to turn on the AC for just us, so it was pretty sweltering. There were hanging curtains separating the bar from the storage area behind it, and I watched casually as someone started to push through them. There was a very large, clear human outline that stood there, pushing out the curtains for 10 to 15 seconds, and then it slowly, clearly backed away. I was the only one who saw. I thought it was odd, obviously, to stand with your face in a curtain for that long. But it wasn't unusual for the cleaning staff to be there this late, and I assumed one of them had stopped to think, maybe they forgot something, and gone back to the kitchen. But who does that? Who stands like that and then backs away like that, instead of turning around like a normal person? Maybe someone just screwing with us. It was just too weird. When the scene was over, I asked if anyone else was in the building. No. The staff left 2 hours ago, and had given the director the keys to lock up. I asked if the AC was on, and everyone laughed. But when I told them what I saw, we all listened anyway. That AC was loud. It definitely wasn't on. We chalked it up to the theatre ghost and moved on. After that, I started talking to him when I was alone and felt watched. I told him he was creeping me out, and he'd back off. He still messed with us for years after that, once stealing a prop that had already been placed and confirmed by several people in the middle of a show. But he wasn't so bad for a ghost. I always heard there was more than one ghost there, and sometimes the watching did feel malevolent. But the guy who felt familiar tended to show up and run the other one off. Or maybe it was just me creeping myself out. But that one night, I definitely saw something unexplainable. Thank you for watching and/or listening to this video. Again, if you enjoyed it, please go ahead and hit the like button, and if you don't already, subscribe to my channel and select the notification bell so you don't miss out on any future uploads. Also, please leave a comment on this video letting me know what you thought of it. Comments really help with the YouTube algorithm and will really help my channel to grow. If you have a story you would like me to narrate, please email me at mrsinisterstories@gmail.com. I've recently passed 50,000 subscribers to this channel, so I'm halfway to my next major milestone. Thank you to everyone who is continuing to subscribe to this channel and contributing to its growth by liking videos and leaving comments. Once I get to 100,000 subscribers, my plan is to reward you all with an epic video with over 3 hours of original content. If that is the sort of thing you want to hear, please keep helping this channel to grow. If you want to support my channel even further, there are a number of ways you can do so. You can consider leaving me a tip for this video via my PayPal, link is included in the description. Check out my Teespring store and consider purchasing one of my shirt designs. You can also check out Audible. There is a book, Punch by J.R. Park, that I narrated. I do get a small royalty if you decide to purchase that. It's a revenge/a horror novel that was a lot of fun to narrate. I'd like to do more in the future at some point. Thanks again.